Running? Okay, my name is Bill or William J. Joseph Scherfel. My father's name was Joseph Anton Scherfel. He was born in Germany. I was born in Cleveland at Deaconess Hospital on Pearl Road on the west side of Cleveland. And the neighborhood that my father and mother lived in was just 2 blocks away from the hospital. And they were freshly married, and Deaconess Hospital was the only hospital in a 5-mile radius. That it was where all of our medical work was done, including Uncle Joe, and I'm not sure about Aunt Caroline. However, that was a very new neighborhood at the time, and one of the things in preparing for this, I discovered that we have lived in this home longer than Cleveland existed as a major U.S. city at the time I was born. I think that's remarkable.
So you were born in 1938?
1938, on October 11th. And I'll always say right before Christopher Columbus did his dirty deed of infecting the New World. Poor world. And that's how I always remember my birthday, because that's in relationship to a great national or world event. And so that's the beginning. Pearl Road turned out to be like the spinal cord of the southwest side of Cleveland. It's places that Jerry's stepmother had a lot of history with, and it was the way we commuted to work every day, my father and myself and my brother, down State Road and Pearl Road. So it was very central to all of our communications to and from our life in the suburbs, first of all into Cleveland, and then later on in Parma, Ohio, which was directly south of that neighborhood in Cleveland.
So when you're saying that it was a major thoroughfare, but this was in a relatively new development, like a suburb of Cleveland?
It was, the city of Cleveland, like any major city, grew like grass would grow out of an island and it grows into the soil.
Right.
It was growing, but they didn't talk about suburbs back then. They were just talked about sprawling city.
So would the city limits actually
grow? The city limits were positioned well beyond that neighborhood.
Oh, okay.
Now, when they finally kept growing, they formed the city of Parma, which was directly south of Cleveland. That made it was a new city. And that happened just prior to World War II. And we bought our house, my dad and mom bought our house in Parma, Ohio, just before the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, because you could not buy a new house on the next day.
Did all construction stop, or?
The entire country changed, focusing on war preparation. Every contract, every business had to immediately start thinking about war instead of their own personal interests, especially manufacturers. But the home building business just went to zero.
So in your new area, you were only, what, 4 or 5 years old?
I was about
38.
4 or 5 years old. And Uncle Joe was still not able to walk when we moved in. And everybody had to put their grass in, and there was nothing that would be provided except the house. And in some cases, and we got one, a garage and a 2-strip driveway. Not a whole driveway.
Yeah.
And our neighborhood had been developed prior to the Great Depression. Parma was a growing suburb, a wannabe suburb, and the whole neighborhood, including even where Jerry lived, was laid out and paved, and then the Depression came. So the whole town, even though there was nothing growing but weeds and trees, had streets, sidewalks, and curbs in the middle of all the cornfields.
Well, that was probably fun for the kids on bicycles and stuff.
It was great. It was great, but it's hard to imagine that.
Yeah. Yeah.
But you realize that the world just came to a screeching halt in 1941. And then it wasn't very long before everything, food, tires, gasoline, building materials, all were on ration tags.
So what's a ration tag? How did that work?
Every family, depending on how many kids in your marital situation, would get a book of ration tickets, and it will tell you how many eggs you can buy a week, how much milk you can buy, if you're eligible to buy tires for your car, and almost so much gasoline, and depending on how far you had to commute to work, you had a ration card for your gasoline.
So all of the economy would run off of these tags, not even like American dollars, or it was.
Oh no,
like
you still pay for it. The tag allowed you to get so much.
Oh, it was just your permission slip.
It was a ration tag. You still had to pay for it.
Oh wow.
So that was different than most children's upbringing, and the greatest impact for children was there was no ration tag on toys. There were no toys. You couldn't buy anything outside of an inexpensive book,
Wow.
kid's book. There were no toys. Every manufacturer of toys was making war goods.
Wow.
And Lionel choo-choo trains was making triggers for sea mines. The mechanism that determines proximity and depth in that's what they were manufacturing. Isn't that? No toys. And this is for a child, we didn't know any better.
Yeah, you were so small.
But because my dad was a machinist, he made toys for us. But the poor guy that was a pickle salesman couldn't make toys. Everybody learned how to make toys out of wood if they could. But until 1946, you couldn't find a toy.
So did you feel kind of lucky in some ways that that your dad could make you guys toys?
We felt lucky because we had the only toys. And my Uncle Tony, who was a cabinet maker, made really, really nice wood toys. Nice ones. So the Scherfel kids were taken care of. But if your dad was a pickle salesman, you didn't get anything.
Glass jars only lose their fun after a
Then
while.
when 1946 came along, the greatest amount of income that the conquered Japanese nation could do was produce toys for a toy-starved America. So almost all the toys that we got in the stores in 1946 and 47 said made in Japan.
Really?
Isn't that interesting? And that got the manufacturing off the ground in Japan. And when my mother's rich ex-employer, she was a nurse, what do you call it, Jerry? She took care of babies.
Oh, midwife.
No.
Like a wet nurse?
No.
No.
I don't know what a wet nurse.
Beyond the housekeeper. Kids.
Oh, like a nanny?
Oh,
A nanny.
Oh,
Nanny. She was a nanny for a very wealthy Jewish family on the east side of Cleveland before she got married.
Oma was?
She was a live-in nanny. And they were a very close relationship with that family. They moved to Brazil, where he proceeded to make a few more millions or billions of dollars in Brazil because he started the first steel mill in Brazil. He was a steel executive in Cleveland.
Really?
And so when they would come up, they would always come to Cleveland for Christmas after the war. They brought us our first real made in Japan toys. And they were wonderful works of craftsmanship.
Wow.
They weren't the cheap Japanese toys.
Do you remember what it was?
Yeah, the first one I got in 1947 was a wonderful 6-inch long Willys Jeep. Everything was handmade on it. It was beautiful.
Really? Was it steel?
Steel.
Wow.
It was wonderful. my mother's friends came back from Brazil for Christmas, which they did. They came up every Christmas. They flew up from Brazil.
They flew from Brazil in
1947 in a Pan Am Constellation, first class.
Wow.
Yeah, wow. And his dad announced that his dad was running for the Senate in the Congress of Brazil. So they had the family steel mill. Anyway, I'm going to hold up an actual toy that my father made. And this is supposed to be a Sherman tank. It weighs about 20 pounds. It's solid steel. All the mechanical parts on it are actually parts of machinery. The gears and the tracks and everything are all from mechanical devices that are used in manufacturing. So there is an example of a toy that's indestructible. My kids have tried to destroy this indestructible toy. Also, he made the same scale a 155 millimeter howitzer, also made out of industrial wheels and pipe and everything. But that we managed to destroy and lose.
Well, that tank's lasted through 3 generations.
That's 3 generations, and maybe John's kids will want to play with it when it's too big to ship anywhere.
Yeah, it is a little bit heavy.
Anyway, so that's an example. My dad also made, I remember very vividly, in 1943, he made a trapeze. And this thing was 3-4 feet long on a channel iron, and made a little metal man with his hands up like this and his claws open, and you would put the little metal man on a spring, leaf spring, pull him back and let him go, and he would fly through the air and catch a steel, what do you call it, trapeze bar, and swing around 2 or 3 times. And it took patience to learn exactly how far to pull it back to get him to the right trajectory and come around on this trapeze bar.
Wow.
He also made a track out of a 1-inch wide on the outside, 3/4 inch track on the inside, channel iron. He made a corkscrew for marbles, and they would come down like this. He bent this thing on a lathe, and then he spread it out so it looked like a corkscrew. And you put the marbles on top, and they all went down, and then they shot across the floor. And he made that too, and I don't know where that went. So this is all pretty interesting stuff. And then, like I said, then when the war was over, you could buy toys if you had money. The key thing that I didn't like about World War II, and almost all children my exact age, is we had an absent father. They all worked 10 and 12-hour days. That was normal in any manufacturing job. You worked a half a day. And so you never saw your dad. He left before you got up, and he came home after you went to bed. And so weekends, like a Sunday, were very important.
So in Cleveland, because it was such a predominantly industrial city, that was a really common thing for you guys.
Well, the principal thing is, at that time, Cleveland was the highest steel producing city in the United States. After it came Pittsburgh. And so, with about 60% of all steel made for airplanes and tanks and bullets and ships, it was extremely important that steel making was the number 1 goal in the city of Cleveland. And the city of Cleveland was about 1,250,000 people in those years, because a lot of people came up when they had to have so much labor. A lot of people came up from Kentucky and Tennessee and Alabama, both white and blacks. And there weren't very many black people living in Cleveland in 1941. But I think the statistic shows that in 1946 there were about 200,000 black people living in Cleveland.
Because they came up to...
And they mostly came up to work in the steel mills and the other manufacturing companies. But Cleveland made Army vehicles, airplane parts. We had a bomber plant, made B-17s. There was another bomber plant up in Erie, Pennsylvania, another bomber plant in Detroit, Michigan. There was 2 bomber plants in Lansing, Michigan, and they made up the one plant in North Michigan, or North Detroit, made 1 B-24 an hour. 365 days a year, it made 1 B-24 an hour.
So what was the company that your dad worked for?
My dad worked for W.S. Tyler Company, which was in the business of making screen, wire cloth, mining equipment for the processing of aggregates, and they even made scientific instruments called sieves, where they could measure particle size, and they were the standard of the world on the Tyler sieves. And my dad made the tooling that made the sieves. He was a tool maker at Tyler, and he made the tooling that made the sieves. And the frames on these sieves were made on punch presses, and he made the dies for the punch presses.
So he would actually make the machinery that would make the
Just
product.
the dies. The machinery was these big punch presses with the big flywheels. And when I went to work for Tyler Company, I repaired the machines that my dad made the dies for.
Did you ever work on any that your dad actually made?
Same machines,
Really?
different dies.
Oh.
The dies wear out.
Yeah.
You know, you can make 20,000 extrusions on a tool, and then it's worn out. You have to make another one.
Did you guys ever work there at the same time?
My bench was adjacent to my dad's bench.
Really?
Yes.
And how long did you guys work together?
On and off for 4 or 6 years at Tyler Company.
Did you go to work together?
We went to work together for 4 years.
How was that?
The same car.
Was that how did that feel working with Papa?
Well, it was that my world was not opening up. It was still a family world.
Yeah.
And then my friends at work were my dad's friends at work. And so if my dad had a good reputation, I was a very welcome boy.
So were you a welcome boy?
I was a welcome boy. Oh, you're Joe's kid. Oh, okay. Well, that left the bar pretty high for me.
Well, I was gonna say,
And-
did you have some large shoes to fill?
Well, when I first went to work at Tyler, because I had 4 years, 8 semesters of drafting in high school, I got a job as a draftsman. But that job was boring. I was drawing elevator shafts because the Tyler Company also made elevator cars. And so I had to draw up the place in the building where the doors slid and opened and closed. And so for 6 months I'm drawing the same thing with just differences in dimension. Now I could be easily replaced by a computer. So it was so boring, and I asked my dad if I could get a more challenging job. He says, well, there's an opening here in the machine shop. What he didn't tell me was that it started with position 1. The guy who shoveled the shavings from the lathes into the dumpster with a coal shovel. And we had all these lathes making shavings, and they were making crankshafts and stuff. And then I had to shovel the shavings and put them in the dumpster. And they were full of cutting oil and smelly grease. And so that was a really desirable job. Then the next job, see, I'm going to actually become a machinist if I stick with this. I'll become a journeyman machinist, so you work from the basement up. So the next job was to be a line belt repairman. Now, if you've seen old pictures or visited museums, you know that up to about 1940, an awful lot of American industry machinery was driven by line shafts that were hung from the rafters of the building. And then they had huge belts that total length would be 40, 60 feet up and back, running off the pulley on the line shaft down to the clutch on the machinery. Well, Tyler Company, which employed 2,500 people, had a lot of line shafts. And so my job was to go from department to department, replacing or repairing the belts on line shafts. And that turned out to be a super dangerous job, because a lot of time I was working 40 feet off the floor on a wobbly, fireman wouldn't go up it ladder, changing a 100-pound belt on the ceiling, and then I have to lace the belt together with leather. And then it has to run true when you start it up. And if it doesn't run true when you start it up, every machine in that department shuts down because it was all running off the same line shaft. And then you had got the look. Nobody is making his quota that day because of the jerky line shaft belt replacement. So I did that for about a year. That was a killer job.
But that was a promotion from the other one?
That was a promotion, right. And then the next job I got was I ran the overhead crane in the machine shop. It was a 30,000-pound overhead crane. It would pick big castings the size of an 18-wheel truck off of a truck and into our super lathes. And these things would weigh 12,000 tons, 15 tons, 12 tons. And you had to pick it up off the trailer and place it in the lathe with the overhead crane. This is the kind that straddles the building. And it runs the whole length of the building.
So
now that was a little humorous note. I didn't really like that job. You only worked about 4 hours out of 8 hours, so it was boring, and then it was ultra responsible, up there. And so they finally got a job where a machine operator was opening up. And you got to remember, there were a lot of old timers in this machine shop. There were 35 or 40 old timers. I have a photograph to prove it. But when they finally had an opening where I could learn to operate one of the machines, they put another kid up there. He was a redhead. And he was, I have another story to tell, but a lot of people that worked in our machine shop were displaced persons called DPs out of Europe. A lot of them were runaways from the communist nations. They had snuck through the Iron Curtain, and they went to work at Tyler Company because a lot of people spoke foreign languages at Tyler Company. And so we had a lot of DP young people, young times, 24, 25, 26. So they put this redhead up on the crane. Well, after he totally destroyed a brand new cutting machine that would cut tool steel, it was this round and 20 feet long, tool steel. You could cut through it. Every blade on the saw was a carbide tip. The machine then cost $20,000. He ran the hook from the overhead crane into the cutting machine and smashed it to pieces. I was back up in the crane.
So these displaced persons, these DPs that you would work with, were they skilled in this, and that's why they got jobs there?
None of them had accomplished a real trade, but they understood the European work ethic. You're nobody, and you learn from your masters how to do a trade. That's the background that everybody came from. And they may have had a 6th grade education or an 8th grade education, but they understood that their future life depended on them learning a skill that could be valuable to an employer. You're not valuable to an employer. There was no, what do you call it nowadays? Sympathy pay?
Severance pay?
Yeah. You learned. You worked for your money. And if you didn't, there was the street outside. You could stand outside looking in. And that's how things were in those days. There was 3 people looking on every job after World War II.
Was unemployment really high?
Yes, after World War II. Because the job orders went down. Steel mill production dropped in half. The market was full of steel everywhere because they got this production going so hard, so fast, it's like trying to stop a race car. So
how did that affect Cleveland?
It affected Cleveland big because, like I said, 1/3 of all the jobs disappeared. And so there was a lot of unemployed people, mostly unskilled people or partially skilled people. And so those were hard times right after the war. So you had this contrast after the war. people couldn't buy a car. They were not available for sale until the war was over, and they finally ramped up car production, but people had tons of savings because they had nothing to spend all their hard-earned money. 12 hours a day, every day, 6 days a week, you had some money in the bank. So they could buy anything, and it drove the prices of the cars up. First one out of the assembly line probably had 10 buyers. All with cash money in their hand. So, and that's why a lot of homes were sold right after the war. And they couldn't build the homes fast enough because people had savings until the Korean War started, and then the cycle started all over again. And it was crazy. It's like a war-based economy. And so that was interesting.
So did all the neighborhoods around Parma at that time, did they fill up after?
Yeah, right after the war, 47, 48, they were building entire blocks at a time. Remember, the streets were already in, the sewers were already in, the power lines were already in. They just had to dig holes, put in the foundation, and build a house. Where contractors would build 7, 10, 12 houses in a row. And they were all sold before they even had the roof put on. And so our boyhood play areas all got consumed. And all of us collectively detested the builders. And one boy on the next block from us, who we know but no name will be mentioned, burned down 5 of them on purpose. And it hit the state newspaper because 5 homes in a row all burning down. Only good baseball toss from our house in Albertley.
So what was the street that you lived on?
Albertley. Albert Lee, but not 2 words, Albertley.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
And so, how was it growing up in the 40s and 50s? What was it like, kind of in a larger city, being a small kid? Did you have movie theaters and baseball the way we see it on TV?
Couple things that colored our youth is that we were in a community that was at least 85% Catholic, and we had every European nationality that you could think of, both from Eastern Europe and Western Europe. But particularly, one survey I saw showed that 65% of the people living in Parma, Ohio had a German surname. That was our hometown. And you could speak German in church and be as understood as if you could speak English. But yet, the churches that were all ethnic, all over Cleveland, you had Polish-speaking churches, German-speaking churches, Lithuanian, all over, everybody had their own churches. And Parma was the new world, where we were Americans. You know, not we were ex-Germans or ex-Swedes or ex-Frenchmen, which is what the city of Cleveland was all about. They had ethnic neighborhoods with ethnic churches. Even the public schools would teach in a language that the kids could understand, at the same time trying to teach them English. But when you moved to Parma, you were born in America, you were raised in America, and you spoke English, but you all had your old country traditions yet. Feast days and polkas, and you know. So it was interesting. And the ones that were the most reluctant to change were the far eastern churches, the Russian and the Polish, Slovenians. They stayed with their national churches, and they spoke their Russian language, and they wore their Russian clothes on Sundays. They were the last ones to become Americanized. And that happened all the way up through the 1950s and 60s. And like Jerry's nieces and nephews, they had a Russian Orthodox church right on its church corner on the end of the street where they lived. And that one was brand new, with onion domes. And State Road, which is where our main street was, had 7 Russian Orthodox cathedrals on it in a 3-mile stretch of road. You know, onion domes, all gold on top, with the mosaics on the outside of the building. Beautiful churches.
I wonder why they were so reluctant to embrace...
Because they continued their religions, their traditions. They didn't want to break away. The old people, the young people, you know, they went to school and they learned English. But the old people, they stayed until they were 80 and died. And they carried on their old country feuds too. And it was bad sometimes. We had one Orthodox church where 3 men were shot dead in the parking lot because the other Orthodox people didn't like them. The ethnic breakdown at the suburbs of Cleveland, Parma was center for the German-speaking. Other suburbs maybe specialize at a different nationality. Those things all diminished over time, but right after World War II they were very prominent. And I would say that less than 10% of Parma could have been a second-generation American, the families. They were almost all foreign-born people who were reaching the end of their professional life. They now had homes in Parma or Parma Heights or Seven Hills, and they were settled. No, some of them had no debt at all on their homes. An interesting point, my father and mother bought their 3-bedroom, 1-bathroom house on a nice-sized lot of property with a garage for $7,000.
Really?
So the monthly payments in 1950 looked like a joke. They were so small compared to inflation that happened after World War II. It was amazing what the shrinking dollar can do to what the value of money.
Yeah.
I'm sure they scraped together to have $7,000 purchase.
Sure.
Qualified.
Sure.
So. Before we get into ethnicity some more, I wanted to mention that what was life as an 8-year-old in Parma? Milk was brought by a horse-drawn van.
No.
Ice was brought for people that did not have refrigerators. Did not have refrigerators. Ice was brought in a horse-drawn van. The bakery goods were brought to the house in horse-drawn bakery vans.
So there was a lot of horses on the street.
And the recycling truck was a horse-drawn trash truck.
So when you talk
And the laundry man would come by in a horse-drawn van, and I still remember the name of the laundry company. It was Chung Lao, no shrinky, no stinky. By the time we got to high school, only the milk company was still horse-drawn. But I'm going to tell you an interesting story, and then we're going to backtrack on language. When I was walking home from kindergarten, which is the only public school I went to until high school, on State Road, which was very close to sweet darling Geraldine's house, I was walking down the sidewalk in a mass of 5 or 10 kids, and we heard all this glass breaking. And we looked down the street that was T-boning into State Road, and here comes an out of control, at the end of his shift horse, with milk wagon still attached. And he's heading home for the hay. And he is running at racetrack speed, and he makes the left-hand turn on State Road, and he goes bumpity-bumpity over the streetcar tracks and deposits his entire load of empty and full milk glass jugs onto State Road. And this is all within 20 yards of us kindergarten kids walking home. And that was something to remember. And everybody came out of all the stores to see all the milk pouring down the hill on State Road. And the other second most humorous part of that was a guy dressed in white with a white cap on, running as fast as he could down Wellington Avenue to catch his horse.
So did you guys have a refrigerator, and did you have that stuff, or did you
We
need
were
all those?
thoroughly modern. We had a refrigerator with a great big drum on the top, which is the evaporator. And then underneath was about a 5x3 refrigerator with a little door on the front. And it would actually make ice cubes.
So you didn't need ice.
Ice cubes, a few of them. Took 24 hours to make another tray of ice cubes. Didn't have frozen food at the stores yet. Oh.
Everything was just fresh.
Everything was canned or fresh.
Did it have a freezer part on?
No.
It just made
It had a little thing that dipped down with coils around it that you put the aluminum tray in that made ice cubes. It had a big handle on it that you could drop the ice cubes out of. That was the state of the art, in 1940, 42.
So how about the laundry guy that you said? They would actually come by and pick up your laundry?
Mm-hmm.
Otherwise you washed it in a sink at home?
You wash your undershirts and things, but your shirts and your nice pants and the ladies' skirts and your suit jackets and your $40 formal ladies' dress jacket, I went to the cleaners.
But you didn't have to go to the cleaners. The cleaners came to you?
Yes.
On a horse.
Why? Because everybody was a one-car family. Mamas were all stuck at home. They couldn't go shopping or to the cleaners unless it was within walking distance. That's left over from living in the city, not in the suburbs. You could walk to the cleaner at the city because all the buildings were 3- and 4-story apartment heights tall. And now we got only one dwelling on every quarter acre. And the nearest public conveyance was a quarter mile away. So there's a lot of things that are different. And one-car families was one of them. And then with rationing, that's why they still had horses. They couldn't ration the hay on the horses. I'm serious. So, but it made for a lot of entertainment. We all befriended each horse. They would know us. And by the way, the milkman didn't have a schedule. The horse stopped at the right driveways. He knew the routine, unless he got the itch to go home. Okay, going back to a more serious matter. How did mothers go shopping? In our case, we walked down to State Road and caught the trolley, which was running on, like the El Paso trolley, running on tracks with an overhead feed wire, which occasionally jumped off and the guy had to go out and put it back on. And we had a lot of them, and they ran in an open ditch in the middle of the street. So if you lost control of your car, you had to get a wrecker to pull it out of the ditch. You could not drive it back out of the ditch. And it was right down, and in every place the street intersected with the railroad, you had a bridge across the tracks, like you do on a railroad crossing. So if you took a turn too wide, you were in the ditch, because they didn't have any curbs on it.
And would it impede the trolley cars? So they
No. It was just, you had a railroad crossing every 50 feet.
Oh.
So it was dangerous. They finally did fill it in and pave it, but that was the condition. And then we used to ride the trolley all the way downtown. I have a photograph to show it to you, where you could go all the way downtown to the terminal tower and get out and shop for clothes and nice things like wristwatches or Easter hats or something, because there were no department stores. The department stores were 8-story high down in Public Square. There were no shopping centers. And so all of these things are radical to a person watching this tape.
Yeah.
No.
So you actually had to go to a specific store to get what you rather than going to like a mall.
You had department stores, and every floor at Higbee's was a different department. Ladies' goods, men's goods, children's goods. And that's how it was. That's what they meant by a department store. And then if you wanted groceries, you went to a mom and pop store, or you went to these things called city markets, which I showed you pictures of. And you bought fresh from the farmers in the city markets. They were big deals. You go to Europe, you still see those city markets on these travel programs. They go, oh, that's nice looking fruit and that kind of stuff. And most of the food was fresh. The big change came for us when an Akron milk company made a milk store on the way to church, and we could buy fresh bread and fresh milk at this store, which kept ridiculous hours, and it eliminated a lot of those horse-drawn wagons. But we had to carry it home. Or if a dad was coming, she'd say, get 2 quarts of milk gallons were unheard of, and a loaf of bread at the Lawson store. A little bit later, when Uncle Joe and I had the daily morning paper, we got our delivery from the newspaper truck at the front door of the Lawson store.
So the quarts were glass containers and you had to give them back to the store?
You had to recycle the glass containers, yeah. Everything was breakable. Way before plastic. Anyway, a little event on the trolley. When I was about 4 years old, we were going to go downtown. Uncle Joe, little guy, myself, not even in kindergarten. We sat down and we talked to our mother, and my mother put her hand over my mouth very tightly, and she spoke very quietly and very firmly in my ear, and she said in German, "You will never speak German in public again." Why, Mom? You will never speak. And I didn't know that much English.
Because you spoke mostly German?
Household language was German. So I was now told that I had to speak in a language I was unfamiliar with. The good news is when I went to kindergarten, I wasn't laughed out of the building because I could speak English. The bad news is I had a very late start on English. My vocabulary was very small.
And so why didn't she want you to speak the German anymore?
Okay, at that time, a little bit after World War II started, everybody's familiar with the fact that the Japanese Americans in California were put in internment camps. They made quite a few movies and books about it. What is not publicized is there were internment camps in the mountains in Pennsylvania for German-speaking people in 1941, 1942. And my mom and dad were terrified.
So they were nervous that they would be identified as German nationals?
Because it was in the newspapers what they were doing to the Japanese. And then they came out and said government's building camps in Pennsylvania, which were not close to any town, for other Europeans of doubtful trustworthiness. And there were actually Germans arrested and put in those internment camps. Well, finally, Roosevelt had to get on radio, apparently I heard this, and say to the American people, you've got to learn to trust your foreign-speaking neighbors, especially Germans, because they are so important to our war effort. He said, they're the ones in industry making the bombs and the airplanes and the tanks. Don't think we're going to put them in jail. And now I speak to the German and the Polish speaking. We will protect you from internment. And then finally everybody could breathe because they were stopped. They couldn't talk anymore in public. A grocery store or any place. In fact, the church attendance in those national churches almost went to nothing. Now, there's a real good important reason for that. My brother, Matt, was arrested in Romania when he came out of a Catholic church. No doubt that he was a practicing Catholic German. And he was sent to 5 years of hard labor in the Ukraine because he was caught coming out of a German-speaking church. That says something, doesn't it? And so they thought the same thing was going to happen to them. But then they realized that all those Germans, particularly, that came into the United States, came in because they had a skill. Watchmaker, toolmaker, cabinet worker. They were skilled people, and they needed those people. One of the things we wanted to share is during World War II, another thing that most people don't realize is that when troop ships took American trained soldiers over to Europe in order to fight against Hitler's German army before Normandy landing and everything in 1944, those same ships that took the American soldiers over brought back to the United States prisoners of war. Primarily German, but a lot of Italian, a lot of North African soldiers were brought back to the United States and put in internment camps, which had to be built. And towards the end, 44, 45, and I think even into 46, my father would be asked to come, along with other people that spoke fluent German, would be asked to visit the prisoners. And the prison camp that was close to our house was in a town called Berea, which was very close to the Cleveland Municipal Airport, on the big public land that was associated with the airport. And so these prisoners were having morale problems, probably fighting amongst themselves and whatnot. So they would invite Germans, particularly if you spoke a certain dialect of German, to come and just chat with the soldiers and try to bring a little peace into their life. So my dad would go, and once in a while he took me, which was an eye-opening experience. I had no idea what other people looked like and what their problems were living behind fences like at an animal farm. They had these cyclone fences, and they would talk through the wire to my father, and he would introduce himself and where he lived, and he would ask the same thing for them. And they felt, I think they were very happy to be able to talk with someone and know that Americans weren't all ogres and evil, and that there were a lot of German nationals living in the United States, and that we weren't necessarily evil people, which is what they heard all of their life. And so that was an experience there.
And what is it that your dad spoke to them? Was it a specific dialect? Or?
Yeah, he spoke both regular German and he spoke Bayerisch, which is a High German dialect. A lot of the words, sentence structure is about the same, but a lot of words that describe things are a little different. And the closer you get to Austria in the mountains of the Alps, the more that dialect predominates. And my dad and the Scherfels were all from that region, so they could speak what they call Bayerisch. And that's a word that you don't hear very often, the Bayerisch dialect. But my mom and dad would joke amongst themselves, I remember, and they would say, "Oh yeah, we met somebody, she says she's German, but she doesn't speak German. She doesn't speak real German," they would say, because they were of a superior, everybody thought their own dialect was superior to the others. And at this time I'd like to mention that my dad met my mom at a German Bayerisch club, which was, you had these clubs, social clubs all over Cleveland, where people could keep their national identity intact by meeting others from the same region of Europe. And there was a club in Cleveland. It was mostly on the west side. It was called Das Turnverein, and their main meeting reason was that they had a gymnasium where they called themselves the Turners, and that's a term for athletic activities. And it used to start like, if you've seen a couple of clowns throwing balls back and forth, it's a contest type of thing. And balancing, those are the Turners. And so they would compete with other German and Slavic language groups in athletics, baseball, soccer, and the big one was gymnastics. And so both my dad and my Uncle Tony were big on gymnastics, and they would go every week, 2 or 3 hours, 4 hours, sometimes 2 or 3 times a week, and they would build up their expertise. And the things that you see on men and women's Olympics is what they were doing. My father became real competitive in a couple of areas. One of them was, you've seen the horse, where you see this long stuffed thing that they would do calisthenics on, feet in the air, arms out and everything. My dad was a state competitor in that, and he was a state competitor in the rings. And that's where you hang with 2 rings and you do your exercise. You've seen that at the Olympics. And he also had a couple other things he would do to warm up. And you notice that most of what he's doing is upper body strength. He would pick up myself and Uncle Joe, one in each armpit, just to do practice lifts. And when he did chinners, we would hang onto his neck just to put more weight on him when he did the chinning exercise at home. But we all knew that the last thing in the world we wanted was a swat from my dad, because we would probably break the wall as we sailed through. We feared an angry dad because of that strength that we saw. But what he would do to warm up at the German gymnasium is he would walk around the gymnasium on his hands, feet straight up. I cannot express to you my amazement in seeing him do that. And the other one would be that he would grab that thick hawser rope that's hanging from the ceiling. He would grab a hold, put his legs straight out in a V, and go up and touch the rafter and come back down. And he wasn't even winded. Those things stick in my memory. And then they would all go into the bar and down a couple of big mugs of beer and go home. That would be my dad and my uncle, Tony. Uncle Tony's expertise was the parallel bars. And that's where you see people swinging and they got their armpits, everything, and they do fancy golden rounds and make big leaps and land on their feet without bouncing. And that was what he was really good at.
Was Uncle Tony older or younger than you?
Uncle Tony was my dad's younger brother. He was the baby of the family. He was the expert wood craftsman. He was a cabinet maker and eventually became the General Electric television console cabinet building department foreman. But all the tools he had at home, all of them, his workbench, his table saw, his planer, they were all built out of hardwood by him. It was magnificent. And he built boats and canoes. And if John is watching this, he made that garage that Jonathan fell on and broke his leg.
Yeah.
What else?
Yeah. So gymnastics was kind of like.
Well, it was a sport for he-men in Germany.
But it was like almost nationally recognized as something you would do as a young man?
When I traveled in Germany, every little town had a club. And they all were identified as a gym. And they would almost always have a soccer field associated with them. Not tennis court, soccer field and a gymnasium indoor, because weather was kind of bad in Germany.
So when your dad came over, because they lived in areas that kind of populated with the same ethnicity of people, that's something that just organically grew in the communities?
Yes, and they used to compete at state level. And Dad and Uncle Tony both would come home with ribbons at state level competition.
Here in the United States?
In Ohio, state Ohio.
Different clubs against different clubs?
Different clubs. There'd be the state of Ohio, our German gymnasium association meeting, and they'd have 15, 20 clubs there.
Oh, wow.
And they would compete against each other, just like you see in the Olympics.
But he was already a grown man with kids.
Oh, yeah, no, he's in his 30s already.
So he was keeping up that pastime.
And then, a little aside, one of Dad's friends from Germany, he had quite a few, and they were scattered around northern Ohio. One of Dad's friends had a bar and restaurant on the east side of Cleveland. And on Friday nights, he would be invited over, free food, free drinks. Anybody making problems, throw them on the street. And they said there were people in there, they would be getting a little inebriated and making a little bit bad jokes against a woman or something. My dad would get up, they would leave. After they saw 2 or 3 go through the door, not on the ground, but in the air, onto the street, there were no more troublemakers in that restaurant. And what they would do to pass their time is they would do a ring pull. Now that's like what you see, what they call arm wrestling. But German arm wrestling is you put a ring around your middle finger, one on each side of the table, and you see if you can pull your opponent over to his armpit on your side. Well, nobody played my dad after a few rounds. And you cannot use your other hand. It's got to be behind your back. And you just... And I always thought, how many finger joints got disconnected with this sport? It's amazing. But anyway, I didn't hear these stories from my dad. I heard these stories from his friends.
Oh.
He said, yeah, nobody ever argued with Joe, he would say. He said he wouldn't say a word, he would lift you up and carry you out of the establishment. And he said, and the letdown wasn't gentle. My dad, he was a quiet person. When the rest of the family loved to argue, my dad would just stay quiet. And if everybody got rowdy, he would pick up and say, I think it's time to break up now. And the girls, my aunts, they loved to argue. That was what they lived for. And us kids, we would just get out. We would go do something else. It was not pleasant. But my dad was always the quiet one. Anyway, it's kind of strange. Even at work, he was known as the gentle giant. People would never argue with Joe. He would just say, you're wrong, and you knew that that was the time to end the conversation. Anyway, he was extremely respected at work. How do I know? Because when they would say, who's this? Oh, this is Joe's son. Oh, and I had a reputation to live up to. I could not be lazy, disrespectful, or anything else, because I knew that I would hurt my dad. And it was very important, because there were some pretty slimy people at work. that would be true. Anyway, what else was I going to talk about?
How about where he's from and his family and stuff?
The family, the Scherfel family, as far as we know, and I've got some records from Robert Scherfel, my cousin, that show that they lived in the same part of Bavaria for at least 400 years. And the name Joseph Anton Scherfel is very, very frequently found in birth records, and in succession. And one of the towns is a city or a little bitty village that could be, you can relate to it if you think of Oberammergau, where they have the Passion Play. Just 5 kilometers away is Unterammergau, which means underneath Oberammergau. And all of this is only 20 kilometers from Kochel, where my father was born and where the family lived, Kochel, Bavaria. And in World War II, at that time, in the 1915s, 1917s, even before 1915, the family had a furniture factory in which both my dad and my Uncle Tony learned the hard work ethic. The girls were homemakers, but Tony and Joe were the youngest 2 children in the family. The story goes that the factory was destroyed by Italian bombers, with my father and my Uncle Tony on the roof watching the biplanes fly over. And it seems that what was happening is that the Italians who were on the Allied side in World War I were attacking Berlin and either had a headwind, or they ran out of altitude, or they ran out of gasoline, but they dumped their bombs in what they thought were harmless places in the Alps, which was right on top of the family furniture store factory. A little bit about the factory. My dad learned his mechanical tricks because when he was not even a teenager, he had already was responsible for starting and maintaining the steam engine that ran the line shafts in the furniture factory. So he had to get up at 3:30 in the morning and fire up the boiler to get the steam to fire the steam engine that ran the overhead power shafts for all the machinery and the heating in a cold German mountain climate. And when Uncle Tony came along, 2 years younger, he began to learn the trade of making furniture. And that was how the Scherfel family business was supposed to stay in operation. But the Italians had another opinion about that. So my father never had a soft spot in his heart for Italians, because he put the family literally out of business. And then everybody had to go find other work, and I don't even know what the detail was there. But they had lots of kinfolk in Bavaria. there's auntie this and tante that and uncle this and uncle that everywhere. So I think many generations of Scherfels and families related by marriage to Scherfels.
What caused them to come across to the United States?
What caused them, both my mom and my dad, but for different reasons, but for the same reason. During and after World War I, there was a lot of chaos in Europe. After World War I, in the 1920s, 1923, 1925, 1927, there were some serious recessions in Germany and serious monetary depreciation, inflation. And so my dad, when he was about 21 in about 1923, was drafted into the National Police Force. Germans couldn't have an army after World War I, but they had to have some way of keeping law and order in the country. They needed it because the socialists, the fascists, and all the other political parties were very militant, and they would attack each other in the street, in public, with firearms. It was complete chaos in the country. There was no money, it was inflation. The joke about taking a wheelbarrow full of money to buy a loaf of bread when you used to be able to take 1 mark to the bakery and come home with a wheelbarrow full of bread. That's inflation. They had inflation in the hundreds of thousands to one. And so even your life savings was worthless because it was in marks. And they had the social unrest, the political unrest. You had instability for a lot of other reasons, other nations like France and in Russia trying to take land away from Germany. The Ruhr Valley, which was the great powerhouse for Germany, was adopted by the French country. That's not nice when they like Canada adopting Cleveland. You know, it was like that. So they all started making plans to leave Germany. There was no future in Germany. And when the Nazi Party got really strong, there was a large number of people leaving Germany. So in my Scherfel family, the girls came over in the middle 1920s. Uncle Joe knows the exact dates. And then Uncle Tony came over, and then my father finally came over. But in order to get into the country, you had to be healthy and have an occupation. And so remember this, when you see all these people coming in with no background, they had to have that in order to be eligible for citizenship. Otherwise you were turned around. If you were going to become a dependent of the state, or if you had tuberculosis and you were checked for that, you went back on the same boat. You didn't stay in this country. And so that was the situation in Europe. My mother left Romania for a different reason, which we'll get into later. But all of Europe was in disorder after World War II. And we as Americans don't understand civil disorder to that degree. Riots on the street every day, and everybody fighting everybody. It's a terrible situation. And they had no future in Germany. They didn't want to be a part of the future in Germany. And so they came to Cleveland because an awful lot of Germans were coming to Cleveland. And about 60% of all immigrants into Cleveland were from German descent. So they kind of moved into an area that was very much like Germany as far as social contexts were concerned.
Did he come through Ellis Island or a different way?
I'm not sure about Dad. Uncle Joe kept good records on that. And I have a few of them, but I haven't reviewed them recently. But he knows from his memory what's going on, because he heard Mom tell a lot of stories over the many years that he was her caretaker.
So your dad ended up working at Tyler?
Yeah, I think the second or the third job he got was at Tyler, and he was there from 1935 until 1962, and he died at about 62 years of age in his sleep.
He was so young.
Relatively young, but not too surprising back then. You know, you still had an awful lot of industrial contaminants and noise and stuff you breathe and the atmosphere. And there was a lot of things that we've learned since are not good for longevity.
Yeah. Do you know what officially they said as to what caused him to pass away?
I'm not sure. I asked Joe several times. They would say heart failure or a stroke or some combination like that, but he died in his sleep.
How old were you? Do you remember?
Yeah, I was home from college when it happened, and I was like 22, something like that.
Yeah.
No, 23, 24, because I was already dating Jerry, your mom. And she had not met my dad, but she went to his funeral. And she worked right across the street from the funeral parlor.
The same one that he ended up going to?
Yeah, on Pearl Road. And she worked at Woman's Federal. It was right across the street from the funeral parlor.
Yeah. But it was quite a surprise for everybody.
It was a surprise for everybody, yeah. I think Dad, one of the things, he was emotionally disturbed because he didn't want to retire, and he was facing that, and he didn't know what to do to keep busy. It was like he had a bleak future, and he didn't like that. And he was in a comfortable niche at work.
Yeah. So he was facing a mandatory type of retirement?
Yeah. Mandatory retirement. You know, the average age of a working man dying back then was about 65, 64. And Mr. Gordon died at 66, I think, 67. That's about the age that working men died, for accumulation of reasons.
Yeah, especially starting as young as he did, starting in, 10 or 12 years old, starting to actually work.
Yeah, and I could say something that's not very nice about Cleveland. The contamination in the air was so bad when you got near the steel mills. It was so bad that you could come out of that, if you driven through that neighborhood with your eyes swollen and tears a couple mile radius of all the steel mills and refineries. It was toxic. And that's the same neighborhood that Mom was born in. Your mother was born right in that neighborhood. And all the buildings were black. The street was black, the trees were black, the bushes were black, the people were black. You go there now, it's pristine. The buildings are clean, the trees are green. It completely, the air cleaning laws is just totally different.
Wow. That's crazy. So when your dad passed, you were the oldest in the family then. So did you feel like you had some obligations to take care of people, or were Uncle Joe old enough already and everybody was kind of settled?
Well, if I remember correctly, I had a year to go in college. Joe was just about finished with his degree, and he was making really good money at the railroad. And so we decided I would finish, and he would take care of Mom, because he could easily afford, with his work, to do that financially. And towards the end, even Mom got a job working for the May Company, and she was a famous salesperson in the baby clothes department. And then she actually worked downtown, and then she worked at Parmatown Higbee's. So, and she had her favorite customers who would come in and buy from her.
You had referenced before how every family was a one-car family, and the dad took it to work. And I always thought it was so peculiar when I was a boy when I learned that Oma never had a driver's license.
No.
I thought that was just so abstract.
No, yeah. She tried to learn on Sunday afternoons to drive stick shift, but no. She never got that pedal right.
But your dad taught you and taught Joe.
Yeah, because we always had standard shift up to those years.
Yeah.
The first car we had with an automatic was a 52 Kaiser, the one that even today looks modern. The first Kaiser we had looked like a Sherman tank. They got so much razz at Kaiser Company that the one that came out afterward It looked like what do you call the electric car? The Tesla.
Oh,
In 1952, it looked like a Tesla. It was low and streamlined, and I mean it was slick. And then you opened the hood, and there was an inline in the block straight six.
ancient
It
technology.
was an industrial engine. However, it did have a 4-speed Hydromatic, which really made the car peppy. But the car I learned to drive in was the same engine in the Sherman tank with no second gear. So I had to learn how to start on an incline, get up to going fast enough that it wouldn't stall in third on the incline.
So a lot of time the men were always described by what type of car they would buy. So what was your dad? What type of vehicle would he buy?
Well, this is also news for people that live today. Cars and hats determined what your place in society was. If you were a craftsman like my father, you were entitled to drive a middle-priced car and wear a hat with a brim in public. If you were a doctor or a lawyer or a bank owner or a business owner, you were entitled to drive a Buick or a Cadillac, and you could wear a double-breasted suit, and you could wear a high-quality brimmed cap with tie in public. You didn't show up any other way. So it was just like seeing stripes on a soldier. If a guy wore one of those caps with the bill forward and a loose shirt, no tie, going to work, and maybe just a jacket on, and he's driving a Ford or Chevy or such, then he was a working class man, and he'd better not be driving something nicer. And then if you were the foreman or a draftsman or an engineer or whatnot, a small business owner, you could drive a Oldsmobile or a Pontiac or a Ford Mercury or a DeSoto or Dodge, but not a Plymouth. You are now middle class. If you were a guy that ran a machine at a factory and you bought a Buick, everybody else at the factory would say, "Who does he think he is?" And they would shame him out of the car because it was a class consciousness. And so when you saw people going to church on Sunday, there was a place for your high-priced General Motors car. There were places for your high-priced Ford. It was very, very important that you displayed your position in life.
That's funny.
So it's funny, but just the hat you wore. And you could see it in the photographs. You see a work gang on a railroad. One man has no tools in his hand and he's wearing a brimmed hat. He's the foreman. No question about it. Nobody with a hammer in his hand is wearing a brimmed hat. Same goes true for all kinds of other occupations. That's the signal of who is the boss, is if you wore a brimmed hat.
So
And if you were the boss, then you had a suit jacket on, even in a dirty shop, because you were the boss. And so the vice presidents and superintendents at Tyler always walked through the shop dressed to kill, because they were the boss. You addressed them as sir. It was like a guy with lots of birds on his shoulder. It was the same thing in society, and it was just the way it was. So I know when young people started buying nice cars because they got a good job, even their own parents would say, "Who do you think you are? You didn't earn that."
Earn it.
Yeah, you haven't done enough things for your brother in the neighborhood to earn that reputation, that look. So it's interesting. I'm not saying it was a bad thing. I think it was a way to encourage people to be very civilly aware of their place in society. And the same was true for a beginning priest. He better have a Ford or a Chevrolet, but the pastor could drive a Buick.
So where did Lincolns and Cadillacs fall in?
Well, Lincoln was a little bit high, even for a pastor. If you drove a Lincoln as a pastor, they would say, is there some money shuffling going on here, or what's going on? The bishop could drive the Lincoln, you see, or be driven in the Lincoln.
Right, yeah. So your dad had Kaisers.
But yeah, they were considered middle class, not too uppity. It was okay. But I can remember my dad. We would be parked at Tyler Company and walking in, and he'd say, "Look at what Johnny just got out of. Who does he think he is?" And so we'd get up to him, and he'd say, "Johnny, that's a really nice Mercury you got." He says, "Yeah, don't tell the other guys. That's why I'm parking way over here."
That's funny.
So when my dad moved up to a Mercury, we all felt more important going into church because he had a Mercury. We all just felt it. It was palpable. But everybody said, my dad deserved it. Right. Joe has a Mercury. He deserves it.
That's an interesting way that you're judged by society according to the value you've placed rather than just what you're wanting to portray.
Your life was such that you did deserve the rewards that you got from it.
Right.
And there weren't any easy things. Now, a sad note, I destroyed Dad's Mercury. On a very cold day, on very, very icy roads, at my high school, leaving a high school event as a senior, I had permission to drive my dad's car to school. And coming out of the parking lot was an S-bend road. And I was driving out of the parking lot 10 o'clock at night, and I saw a car coming the other way, and that put him in the middle, upper middle class status. And he did, because he was a toolmaker. So I drove the Mercury to school one day, middle of the winter, and I succeeded in totaling out Dad's car. In the parking lot, coming out of it, it was very slick. It was ice, freezing rain. Guy come the other way, made a sharp turn in the road. I saw him coming. I knew there was glass ice on the street. I drove off the road. I drove up a driveway. I drove across a tree lawn. I hit the front porch of the house, and then this guy plowed into me on the front lawn and demolished my dad's car. And my dad said it was my fault.
Were you in the driver's seat?
I was driving.
So it was probably going to be blamed on you anyways.
That was his pride and joy. I really felt sorry for him.
Oh.